And 3, Levinas talks about phenomenon and being. Very, very basic stuff. So Cyndie, you're in charge.
So, the theme of this section is, as the title suggested, maybe the distinction between phenomenon and being. Levinas here opposes to Heidegger and its conception of truth. Truth of being is not what is hidden and needs to be unveiled for Levinas. The way by which being manifests itself is not unveiling, but expression. Actually. So the concept of expression is central here. Concerning the situation in totality and infinity, these pages are interesting because they are the last pages of the second section about interiority, and they come just before the section concerning the face. And more generally concerning the work of Levinas are interesting because they anticipate the distinction between the saying and the saying. This abstract can be separated, I think, in 3 parts. I will, so paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 together. They deal with the relation between interiority and exteriority, that is between the I and the other. And here, Levinas develops this relation as teaching. Paragraphs 4, 5, and 6 are about expression, phenomenon, and being. It's really the central part of the subsection. Sorry. So it's about the way the being manifests itself. As I said it before, the being or the thing in itself does not manifest itself first and primarily through unveiling as phenomenon, but for expression and a face. Here the concept of face is not developed. The purpose is more to say that phenomenon is not first, the first or the true way the being manifests itself. Okay, and the paragraphs 7 and 8 are about interiority and responsibility, and they're really open to the third section of the book. So let's go with the first part, so paragraph 1, 2, and 3, and the relation between interiority and exteriority as teaching. I will go paragraph after paragraph. So paragraph 1. Levinas records that the real tension between interiority and exteriority, or between the I and the other, is not one that is understood as totality. Indeed, Levinas writes that we interview the order of relations irreducible to both governing totality. So more precisely, interiority should not be understood as something limited by something else. So it deals with the concept of freedom we discussed this morning. It's not this conception of freedom as
It's not that battle of freedom.
yes,
Sautereau.
yes,
Yeah.
negative freedom.
Right, you were free to live as mine.
Yes. So Levinas doesn't think the relation to the other in terms of freedom and limitation. But how to understand this relation between interiority and exteriority? Levinas writes that we enter here the order of desire, but in this subsection it doesn't develop the concept of desire. Rather, it suggests to apprehend the relation between interiority and exteriority as teaching. So possibly we will have to link those two concepts, desire and teaching, what we will be able to do through the concept of the idea of infinity. So in the first paragraph, Levinas introduces the concept of teaching, which represents a kind of relation which is not understood as totality as we know. But what does Levinas mean by teaching? That's the question. And we will now go to paragraph 2 to answer this question of teaching. Actually, Levinas distinguishes what he calls teaching from Socratic meiotics. That is the Socratic way of teaching. As we know, meiotics consist in making the mind of the other deliver a knowledge that the mind already possesses in it. So in meiotics, the student, I mean,
Disciple.
Already possess the knowledge, and thanks to the master and his heart of questioning, his heart to ask the right questions, his knowledge can come back to his mind. So it's for Socratic meiotics. And Levinas proposes another way to consider teaching. He writes that teaching is a discourse in which the master can bring to the student what the student does not know yet. It means that the master brings something to the student that the student doesn't have in him, into his mind, and something that he can't find by himself. He needs the master. And what he can't find in himself and by himself is decided often infinity. So Levinas writes that teaching continues the placing in me of the idea of infinity. The idea of infinity, as you know, is a thought that at every moment thinks more than it thinks. In the idea of infinity, the content of the idea, so the ideatum, goes beyond the idea we can have of it. The idea of infinity, Levinas writes, implies a soul capable of containing more that it can draw from itself. So we really see the opposition with meiotics. In meiotics, the student draws everything from itself. On the contrary, the idea of infinity makes this impossible. Infinity is something that extends beyond the idea we can have of it. And for Levinas, at least in totality and infinity, it is through teaching that we can have this idea of infinity. But before going to this point, just would like to say that one cannot really say that Levinas opposes his concept of teaching to the Socratic conception. Indeed, more than an opposition, the Levinasian concept of teaching is prior, comes before, I would say, to Socratic meiotics. So it's not really an opposition. Levinas writes that this whole work seeks only to present the spiritual according to this Cartesian order, so the idea of infinity, prior to the Socratic order. So prior to means that it enables the Socratic meiotics. Comes first. I don't know what's the proper English word. Do you say original?
Original.
Like originaire in French?
Originary.
Originary.
But it's a made-up word. It's a philosopher's word.
Okay.
It's
Originary.
Would you say that this is a kind of extrapolation from the Cartesian idea, according to which this ontological argument, this theological argument of Descartes, according to which, precisely because we have the idea of a God, of an endless, infinite being, and we cannot see nowhere in we can see nowhere in our lives something which resembles this idea. This idea has to be put in us by God Himself.
Yes.
So it's just that Levinas somehow takes this idea, replaces God with the other, with a teacher in this case. Would you see?
Oh, certainly. In fact, if I could intervene
Yes.
in this first section. Very interesting, and certainly want to talk about Descartes, because he calls this the Cartesian order,
Yeah.
in contrast to the Socratic order. So wouldn't we be tempted, this immigrant from Lithuania, writing in French, characterizing his view as a Cartesian order, wouldn't we immediately be suspicious of flattery, of rhetoric, that he's going to dupe us French into thinking that he's more French than we are, that Descartes has priority over Socrates? Then, to make this even worse, continuing, the Socratic dialogue already presupposes beings who have decided for discourse, who consequently have accepted its rules, whereas teaching leads to the logical discourse without rhetoric, right? Without flattery or seduction, and hence without violence and maintaining the interiority of him who welcomes. What a clever writer he is, right? At the very moment we feel he's tricking us, he's seducing us, he's flattering us, he is telling us he is doing this in the name of a discourse that has no seduction, has no flattery, and is even more pacific than the Socratic
No
discourse.
rhetoric. No rhetoric.
No rhetoric. So we must take seriously the Cartesian order, and certainly it's the argument that after the doubt comes to the cogito, which is the foundation of all things, which would be recollection, the collected being, the cogito thinking itself. It's a performative. As it thinks, it is thinking, and it affirms itself as thinking. He says, I had the idea of God in me beforehand. It's exactly what Levinas wants to say, but transposed, as you say, Paul, onto the alterity of the other. It's not, so the idea of God for Levinas is nothing other. I mean, let's say this, as he says earlier, famously in the section 1, that any idea of religion that does not come down to speaking about interhuman relations is a primitive form of religion. So that there's no simple idea of God means the other, because I've heard people say this about Heidegger, that, oh, the being is God. I heard this said. You know, these theologians can't be stopped. You know, you can't stop them like vermin. You know? So people say this about Levinas. Oh, the other is God. And what are you talking about? You know, as if you have this preconceived, well-formed notion of God, and that's the other. You're meant to rethink what it means to be in relation to something that cannot be conceptualized or understood or known or predicted. And that would be the relation with the other. And from there, you have a chance to begin to understand what it might be to have a religious relationship. In fact, he calls that relationship religious. But Levinas wants to give philosophical credentials to his thought. We know this, right? So as much as he criticizes Western philosophy for its imperialism and idealism, he points to those high moments, the good beyond being in Plato, but especially to Descartes, because this is so close to what he wants to think. This is exactly what he wants to think if we think of God in a new manner. So this structure of the anterior posteriorly is just right in front of you. In the, what is it, the third meditation or is it the second? Third. It's in the third. So it's right in front of you in the third meditation. That I have in me already the idea of God, even though there's nothing deeper, no more. There's no origin other than the cogito. It's astonishing. So Levinas jumps on this, and there's no seduction here, no rhetoric. That's exactly what he's talking about. That structure, the anterior posterior. Precisely. Also, you can go further with it, as you are suggesting, that the finitude. How do I know the finitude? Why do I think doubt is worse than knowledge? Because the finitude comes from, and must have had this idea of perfection somehow, regularly.
That's very important.
Yeah. Yeah, so that before the other, I am guilty. I am already guilty.
And that why why is that? Because for Descartes, the idea of infinity is not negative, it is positive.
Yeah.
Because a lot of interpreters would say infinity is a negative term because it's opposed to finitude. And Descartes argues precisely against that, and Levinas picks it up. For him, that's very important.
Which is why I'm a little bothered, but I don't, you know, I'm the one who's saying Levinas doesn't have a technical vocabulary. I always refer to the notion of infinity, because infinity is a negation of the finite. The terms perfect and imperfect. Because then you start with perfection. So that the imperfect is imperfect in relation to perfection, as opposed to finite infinite. That pair doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
Because the suspicion then is built into the language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where you go the other way.
Yeah, and Descartes
It
exactly argues against language. Yes.
Yeah, and so it works the other way. It's like, what a wily fellow we have here, and that he's got us French now on our Descartes. He's made Descartes more than we have. Right? Descartes' more important than we thought. And I remember Henri Birbeau in the amphitheater saying, what is our meaning of the French? How do we conceive the history of Western philosophy? He goes, there's Socrates, there's Plato, there's Aristotle, and then there's Descartes. You know, this is the French conception of the history. And I thought, that's pretty much how we do think of it. You know, unless you're theologically oriented, everyone skips all those guys. So he makes of Descartes even more. You couldn't go further with Descartes than this. And of course, Levinas's Descartes is Levinas's Descartes.
Actually, you can go to the page 211, in which Levinas talk about Descartes' idea of God, the idea of infinity.
Yeah.
In the middle, here is a sentence called "God is the other." We talk about.
If you want, we can, because he has 2 pages, 210 and 211.
211.
Actually, 212.
212.
No, but there's 3 pages.
Yeah. This is the place.
This is the Descartes place. So if you want to pursue this thought that we've just begun here, because Levinas will insert what he's about to do, and we know he's just about to go into the face, it's pages 210 to 212. That's his disquisition on Descartes. But he everywhere is peppering his work with accolades to Descartes. Again, it's not just anti-rhetoric. This is the structure of Descartes' thinking. Even to the point that Descartes is he's overwhelmed by the idea that it's a trauma. It's a trauma for Descartes. The rationalist. Right? Yeah. So, and Descartes is interesting because Spinoza criticized Descartes for not being Cartesian enough. Spinoza is more Cartesian than Descartes, not in Levinas's sense, right? Descartes, Spinoza only wants the rationalism. He wants to stop at the cogito, whereas Descartes is true to the phenomena. He's torn. There's an eternal debate about Descartes. Is he on the medieval side? He's on the modern side? He's this pivotal figure. Wolfson, the great scholar, said that Spinoza's the first modern philosopher. Because he is the first thoroughly, uncompromised, fully modern philosopher. Whereas Descartes is more interesting, because he's more than that. Anyway, so the second part of I didn't want to intervene with
two.
I'm sorry, you're still there.
Figure, yes, of the master.
The teaching.
Oh, the teaching.
Teaching.
Oh, so let me ask you,
The
do you think
master.
teaching is the same as saying? Teaching is the same as saying?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
By the way, also, I have to point this out, because someday I'm going to write something on this, because for years now I've been marking all my books with a special way of marking it. This expression, this whole work, all over Levinas, you will find him referring to his own book. And Derrida picks this up. what I'm saying at this moment, right? Derrida wrote 2 articles on Levinas, and the second one is at this very moment. Levinas interrupts his own writing in this way to remind us there's an author writing this book, right? Because there's a way of writing where everything is in the text. For Levinas, not everything is in the text. The author steps in and says, oh, this is a book. I'm writing a book for you, right? And he does it frequently. If you pick up on that, you'll see this kind of expression all over the place in Levinas. And you don't find it in most writers. Yeah. Anyway, just thought I'd point it out.
So, the figure of the master, it's of course different from Socrates, but also from the figure of the master in otherwise than being. So the master of justice, it's not what we fear.
You're thinking of recur. You're thinking of recur.
So we know that for Levinas, the other can be the master who orders me. So that's in otherwise than being. But here the figure of the master has another sense. Is the one who teaches me the idea of infinity. In order that the idea of infinity comes to the mind, and that the I or the self, who is withdrawn into oneself, opens to the other, it is necessary that the idea of infinity is taught by the master.
The word master in French, though, means teacher.
Maître.
Maître means teacher. Whereas in English, it doesn't mean teacher. It has much worse connotation.
Yeah.
Slave and master.
Slave and master.
Okay.
Yeah.
How would you would just say teacher?
Teacher.
Teacher.
Maître
Okay.
would be the teacher.
Okay.
We would never say the master.
Star Wars.
Obi-Wan.
But if you say the teacher, does it refer to otherwise than being, or how do you say the master of justice, or what how it goes in
I
otherwise
think they
than
did
being?
translate as master of justice. I think they just did. Yeah.
I have the translation.
It's master of justice.
Master, I can look if it's master.
You can search for that phrase.
I can search for master.
I always found that a disturbing phrase. That's why I was upset that it recurred back so tightly on it.
There's no master.
No, but in French, it uses the term maître
Maître.
in totality and infinity, and I mean it refers also to otherwise, and I mean it's,
Yeah.
in French it refers also to otherwise and beings.
Okay, so
we can refer it. And
let's ask if Paul could look up then to the teacher of
we
justice.
can link
No, it doesn't work. The search doesn't work because it's not a PDF. It's a.
Oh, it's not searchable.
It's not
Here, I've got it
searchable.
all.
I'm not that advanced.
So, the teacher. So the idea of infinity is an idea that will never be totally integrated, an idea that will never become familiar. It will always stay outside, external, absolutely external. Moreover, the idea of infinity is the only idea that has been put into us, and so that was not already in us, as in maiotics. So in Levinas writes in, I think it's in the article Philosophy and the Idea of Infinity in collected papers. The idea of infinity is then the only one that teaches what we are ignorant of. It has been put into us. It is not a reminiscence. It is experience in the sole radical sense of the term, a relationship with the exterior, with the other, without this exteriority being able to be integrated into the same. The thinker was the idea of infinity, is more than himself, and this inflating, this surplus, does not come from within. I think it's just really understandable. The idea of infinity is really clear here regard to our teaching. So let's go to paragraph 3. So teaching enables the opening to the other, but it supposes what Levinas calls separation, as we said this morning and yesterday. The idea of infinity requires separation. So we talked about that.
What about this sentence, separation as a break with participation is deduced from the idea of infinity?
Where is this?
The third sentence in the third paragraph.
So separation
Separation.
requires the idea of infinity,
Yes.
what it means.
I think it's a remarkable sentence because particularly the way this class, our seminar has been structured, starting with section 2,
Separation.
right, we could be misled. We can never forget that section 1 came first, that this whole discourse is possible because of the idea of infinity, right?
Yeah.
Although I'm happy to do it this way, starting with section 2, because I want to give phenomenology the strongest shot. This is a wake-up sentence. That we only, in the way that Descartes thought of his imperfection because of the idea of perfection, we can think of separation as separation in the face of the idea of infinity, which is the absolute separation. Right? So separation relative to the Iliad is a relative separation, even though the separated being is absolute unto itself, right? That absoluteness is what is absolute in standing independent of the idea of infinity. Right? So that the problem with Dionysian frenzy is you wake up. So that you lose your self-identity of separation in the Dionysian frenzy, the night where all cows are black, but then you wake up the next day. Whereas you never wake up from the idea of infinity. There's no waking up from that. That is waking up. Or I could say you never can sleep from that. That is, your wakefulness is never wakeful enough for the idea of infinity. So, because it's such an odd sentence given the way we've been proceeding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and I would say that in the order of the same, the self needs the other, but the other of the world, that in the enjoyment it integrates in him, so which is different. On the contrary, in order that the ethical relationship be possible, the self and the other should not be in this kind of relationship of the same, of enjoyment.
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that?
It's about the notion of separation.
Yes.
And why does the idea of infinity require the separation? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that.
That's a theological question, the way you put it. Why does the idea of infinity require separation? And Levinas has no problem with that.
Yeah.
There would be no idea of infinity without separation. God alone with himself is not God.
So paragraph.
You need demons.
Yeah. It's just a speculative idea. It's one of those Bergson would throw out of your recall. It's why is there nothing rather than something again, right?
So let's jump to paragraph 4.
Good, because I do have one more sentence.
Phenomenon.
I have one more sentence, because I love the way you're presenting this. Let me go back to a sentence, and I want you to tell me, the class, what's wrong with this sentence. Bottom of page 180. The terms remain absolute despite the relation in which they find themselves. Because I'm thinking no truer statement could be made about Levinas's philosophy. In fact, one of the unique things that Levinas has brought to philosophy is the four-pronged relation. That is, the asymmetrical relation, which is a diagonal, has two terms that are different from each other, and the relations between the terms are different depending on which term you come from. So it's a relation with four elements. Two terms, both different, and two relations, both different. Philosophy does not usually deal with such a relation.
And no fifth term or third term.
No fifth term.
Which would unite.
No reduction to another term, no possible dialectic, fourth term relation. But what's wrong with this sentence? The terms remain absolute despite the relation in which they find themselves.
They don't constitute a unity.
That is correct.
Don't form a circle.
That is correct.
Relative to each other.
He's trying to avoid this idea of totality.
That is correct. He's trying to avoid totality. What's wrong with this sentence? The terms remain absolute despite the relation in which they find themselves. I'll tell you what's wrong with it.
You want, I'll guess.
Do it, go for it.
Maybe,
Yeah?
you should have said despite the relations, in which it should be plural.
Ah, that would help, but that's not what I was thinking.
Okay.
It would still be just as bad. It would be. It would be just as bad. Although I shouldn't say that, it would be slightly better, but in the way I'm saying, it would be just as bad. And I don't want to belabor the point, but we're looking at it from the outside. There is no outside in Levinas's philosophy in this sense. The I that is in such a relationship is, how can I say, me, myself. I want to say you, yourself. There is only one perspective from which to see this statement's truth already in it. This is a classic case of the said. Right? That is, you walk around saying, oh, I got Levinas in my pocket. The terms remain absolute despite the relation in which they find themselves. Oh, four-pronged relation. New. What Levinas is talking about is not contained in those propositions. Right? The truth of the proposition is that we are already engaged in that very relation, in the first person singular, and from no other place. So the analogy is marriage. Anyone can talk about someone else's marriage, but they have no idea what it is. The only people who know about marriage are the two people married. That's the relation. Right? I'm just giving you an analogy. That's the analogy to what we will get to in the relation to the face. It's the non-substitutability, the election of that position of responsibility. So I'm just, of course the sentence is wonderful, it's a beautiful sentence. It captures so much of what Levinas wants to say. And yet, if we walk around with this sentence in our back pocket, we have no Levinas. That's what I want. I go think about that sentence. Okay.
So next paragraph about phenomenon being an expression. So in interiority, that is in economy and work, whereas being is separated, it appears as a phenomenon. What is a phenomenon? Meaning is right that a phenomenon is a being that appears but remains absent. So it is a being. So it is a being that does not assist to its manifestation, that is not present as in the work. In the work, the one who made it is not there anymore. The work lives by itself without the one who made it, without the support of the one who made it. It is the example, as Levinas took it himself, of the written discourse that Plato discusses in Phaedrus. So in the work, the author, does not assist with all manifestation or revelation. He is not there when the work is viewed, is judged. It is as if Levinas writes, one has penetrated into his interior, but in his absence. So one is not there anymore. So what is lacking in the phenomenon is the speech, the living word, parole in French.
And by the way, this is written, there are people who argue that otherwise than being or beyond essence is a response to Derrida. Here it is, it's already here. It's before Derrida has published. Right? It's here.
It's already
Yeah, it's here. It's not a response to that, it's an extrapolation of his own thought. It's Levinas's own proper thought. Right? I mean, at the same time, it's responding to Derrida. It's right here.
Develops.
Yeah.
So, as for Plato, in Phaedrus, there seems to be for Levinas a superiority of oral speech over written speech, and the contrary in Ricoeur's work. So Levinas write it just a few pages before in totality in 50, page 69. He's talking about the interpretative one is called upon to speak. Page 69. Oh yes, the interpretative. Interpolated. One is called upon to speak. His speech consists in coming to the assistance of his word and being present. This presence is not made of instants mysteriously mobilized in duration, but of an incessant recapture of instants that flow by presence, that come to their assistance, that answers for them.
I did, again, just to reiterate this non-technical vocabulary, what he's calling phenomenon here is what he writes about in the article, phenomenon and enigma. And this is enigma. Right? So he boldly goes, we're going to call it phenomenon here. Elsewhere, he'll call it enigma. One has to grasp the idea. So, yeah.
So in the next paragraph, Levinas distinguishes the mode of manifestation of the phenomenon and the expression, which is the mode of manifestation of the other, of the face. And here Levinas opposes to Heidegger, and particularly paragraph 7 of Sein und Zeit.
Wow.
For Levinas to express oneself or to present oneself in person, it's not to manifest oneself as a phenomenon, that is, as a being who is manifested as absent from its manifestation, and who doesn't have its help, and so to have to be understood through the context, for the system in which it is integrated. The phenomenon is understood as this or that, but not from itself. But in the expression, the living word, it is different. Indeed, as Levinas writes on its page 91, speech consists in the other coming to the assistance of the sign given forth at attending his own manifestation in science, redressing the equivocal by this independence. So the other does not manifest itself as the one who is to be seen, but rather as the one who wants to be heard. So to really understand what Levinas means by expression as a mode of manifestation of the being, we need to better understand his critiques of phenomenon, and more particularly of the phenomenon as conceived by Heidegger in Sein und Tag. As I said, it's mainly about paragraph 7 of Being in Time. So again, Heidegger, Levinas writes that being, the thing in itself, is not with respect to the phenomenon of the given. And so here, about the word, why is he using being as a thing in itself? It's just, it should be maybe the other.
I think, why shouldn't he appropriate the Kantian language?
Yeah.
Why not take it
And
over?
he say that otherwise than being tries to go out from the language of ontology, because we know that in infinity.
He has the authority to reinterpret these terms.
Yes, sure,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's
So his,
weird.
it is weird.
He thinks
It is so
in
weird.
terms, but,
He does this in so many registers. He takes a lot of Christian terminology and gives it new meaning. He takes a lot of
Yes,
Jewish
sure.
terminology and gives it new meaning. He takes a lot of philosophical stuff.
Yes.
Certainly Heidegger did this before him. All the great philosophers do this.
yes, sure.
Yeah,
but-
so, we would be humbled.
I know
to
for
do
every
it.
terms like revelation or but being, I mean, it's
I
just
know.
weird.
It is weird.
When I,
Or thing in itself.
yes,
It's
yes,
so
those two
weird.
terms. And I was thinking that we may not misunderstand or
Right.
it's just,
I have the feeling that the more you are able, the more these terms have flexibility. So that when I encounter things myself, I can't get past Kant. That's Kant. Right? But when Levinas sees things himself, he can take Kant and move on. That's the greatness. So it is astonishing. Yeah. But I guess he's already redone Descartes. So,
so we know that I want to go through paragraph 7 Being in Time. It's, as you know, the methods Heidegger
Uses about
uses,
phenomenology,
yes,
phenomenon. Oh,
phenomenology,
yes.
phenomena,
Oh, yes. But look what he
what
did to Husserl.
composes the word? Excuse me?
I'm saying, look what Heidegger did to Husserl.
Yes,
Right?
yes,
And
yes,
your
with the
book
word
that is
phenomenology,
dedicated,
yes,
right.
yes,
This book is dedicated to this.
yeah.
In
I
some
think it's
editions.
a-
In some editions.
I think it's another.
Really? I thought it's old edition.
Oh no. You know that. They removed the dedication.
Oh, yeah, that's
Later, yeah.
later.
Yeah. This-
Check.
But
So against the conception of Heidegger, that the Dada has a tendency to the covering, I don't know, veiling,
favorite.
needs to be unveiling by hermeneutics. And so against this conception, Levinas proposes a concept of expression. For Levinas, the truth of the thing in itself is not disclosed, is not unveiled. The thing in itself expresses itself. So being doesn't appear, it manifests its presence through the word, through speech. It doesn't appear, but gives himself to hear. You don't see him, you hear it. So the way being manifests itself is expression.
This is,
This
when
is
I- if I may,
Yeah, sure.
there's a very interesting passage in Being in Time, which was a French commentator, Filosofija.INFO, was almost unknown, but he writes incredible stuff on Heidegger. He wrote a book of 500 pages just as commentary to a few phrases in Letter of Humanism. And he wrote a short essay on a phrase in Heidegger. When Heidegger talks about the voice of conscience, who is calling the Dasein to himself. And he once says, and this is very peculiar, that he speaks about the voice of the friend Dasein carries with himself all the time. Because we are speaking about how the face translates into voice. It's a very interesting passage in Heidegger because it's the only passage where he mentions the word friend, and although it mentions it as an appendix of the Dasein has its friend in its pocket, there's no problem. So the other, it's right next to me. It's no question of transcendence or getting to it or.
So he uses that with the voice of
Yeah. So this commentator accurates the voice of conscience with the voice of the friend that the Dasein is carrying with him. And I think that in Aristotle and Nicomachean Ethics, you can find this idea that in order to become friend to the other, you have to be first friend of yourself.
And again, but that fits what Levinas's critique, because the voice of conscience calls Dasein from itself to itself.
Yeah.
So it would be the friendship that I'm saying, Levinas's notion of friendship would transcend, is the true friend in Aristotle is only the person who shares the same ideals as you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that a good person really can't be a friend with a bad person.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas Levinas is saying, no, the friendship transcends those sorts of things. So it's an interesting locution that it's the voice of the friend, but unless you're a genius commentator, it's hard to make much of that. And if he brings it to Aristotle, he's keeping it the same. Aristotle doesn't bring us any further than the conscience calling itself from itself to itself, because that's Aristotle. Which is why you, you don't really need. I mean, you need a friend, but not ultimately. Penultimately, you need a friend, right? Because you want to be a god.
In Aristotle, you want to be better in order to have a friend.
Yeah.
And by Heidegger, it's more like the friend in you calls you to your better self, so to say.
Like we would naturally in English think of the voice of conscience. The voice of conscience is the inner voice. Sometimes called Jiminy Cricket. And that would be a point of criticism that Levinas would have. It's the manner in which all these terms that could have opened up to morality don't in Heidegger. Guilt doesn't, conscience doesn't. It really does block it with this ontic dismissal.
Because we are making ontology here, we are not even raising these questions.
Right.
And I think that when Levinas discusses here the voice, and I think he alludes to this idea, the idea of voice of conscience and so on. Because the voice of conscience is not a transcendent voice. It's not a voice that comes really out. It's in Heidegger.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not.
Right.
Although Heidegger conceives of it as transcendent par rapport to Dasein, but it's not actually a transcendence the way Levinas conceived it.
In Levinas' terms, it would be a relative transcendence, but not an absolute transcendence. Yeah. So ultimately, relative transcendences collapse immediately up. They can't be maintained to the end.
It's maybe a voice, but it comes away from
two
the
points.
place, from the
Cyndie.
or any else.
Yeah.
Yes, excuse me.
Yeah, I have 2 points of
Yeah,
your
sure.
presentation.
Sure.
Your first depiction of truth of being as hidden in Heidegger. It may not be because of the ungraspability due to the depth of the being, but because of the metaphysical concealment of being. That was brought about by the metaphysical way of looking at objects, phenomena. And it has been there since Greek metaphysics, so Plato and Aristotle. And that is not because of any secrecy, and that is one point. And another is infinity. And every time we speak of exteriority as a human other, whereas other objects of nature can also be exteriority. I think this issue Levinas does not take up very well, very seriously. And every time he speaks of exteriority as a case of other human being.
So the idea of infinity and
Yeah.
exteriority?
All exterior objects can also evoke infinity in us, provided we does not reduce them to our cognitive grasp. That cognitive kind of grasping actually reduces their alterity.
Yes, yes.
And thereby our self is also born. Whereas if we let them free and let them allow to speak instead of reducing to our cognitive grasp, there is a dimension of infinity can be
About objects?
liberated from objects as well. I think that is what Heidegger speaks about when he speaks about poetic disclosure, poetic unconcealment. Can be a case of infinity. And that I think this point is not properly discussed in Levinasian writings. Every time he speaks of infinity with regard to human being alone.
I think you're right, but I think Levinas says something about that when he says that we don't have the world, and after we have the world, we have the objects in the world, the things in the world. But in grasping a thing, the world opens itself. So this is the idea of infinity in the thing. The thing allows us to see the world, and this is pretty much similar to the Heideggerian idea of fourfold. So everything in itself comes from its gathering, actually. The thing is gathering, bringing together. So the thing for Heidegger brings together these four dimensions: the mortal and the gods, earth and sky. And this is, Levinas doesn't go into such a detail, but he says that the object opens the world, not the world opens the object. I don't know if you agree.
I wanted to say in response to what Koshi said that I do think that there's a great deal about this, and especially in the article that Igor referred to, Reality in its Shadow, that the language of poiesis closes in upon itself, and that it has a kind of stasis, a kind of self-absorption that ultimately is corroded by the Iliad. It doesn't hold up, but and that one can be absorbed or mystified by that world, that form of transcendence. And I think what's happening is, and maybe I'll repeat myself on Thursday, that in phenomenology, you look to the strongest sense of the term to find out the meaning of that phenomenon, the strongest sense of the phenomenon. So the question is, where is the strongest sense of transcendence? Do we learn transcendence from the infinity of things? And Heidegger suggests yes. They open up the world. They open up to a world, and then the world gives them, and the withdrawal, the giving and the withdrawal. And this is our relation to the infinity. And Levinas is saying, no, that's still a derivative notion, that we're already in contact in terms of exposing such a world to the other, sharing such a world with the other, gifting such a world to the other, that we have a sense of transcendence, of which this sense that you're characterizing of things having transcendence and infinity derives. So he's not denying the allure and the depth of things. He's just saying their transcendence, and we'll come back to the face of the dog with the same answer, their transcendence is derivative. Now, you could call that humanism, and Levinas doesn't mind if we call that a humanism, but it's a humanism that includes all of creation. It's a humanism that cares for animals, that cares for things, that cares for the cosmos, but it has a priority. You know, I heard a speaker who said he would pose a question to high school students: if you're at the beach and your dog is drowning, and an anonymous human being is also drowning, who would you save? And he was shocked to find out that most of them would save their dog. And I share his shock. I think the dog should be saved, but I think the dog should be saved after the anonymous human being. And Levinas is providing a philosophy, I think, that can help us understand not only the imperative to save the anonymous human being, but the imperative to save the dog, and the hierarchy of saving both of them. Whereas I think Heidegger's starting with this absorption in things, and the splendor of things, the evanescence of things, and the givingness of the given of the world, doesn't enable us to do any of those, really to face the most important choices in our life. Because he's, in Levinasian terms, he's missing the real source of that transcendence, even in the world. That's how I would answer it. So I don't think he's avoiding it. Given Heidegger's philosophy, Heidegger, of course, is going to present us much, much more in terms of the richness of the world, the fourfold, etc., the shoes, and Levinas won't. Because Levinas wants to go in what is to his mind the source of this transcendence. So that's the best answer I can think of. Does that answer your? Yeah. So he's nodding with your dog's face. I was going to say the face of the dog is your face.
The face of the dog is a ghost, always haunting. We all respond to.
You know, this dog comes from that article that we also wrote. Bobby.
Bobby, when he was in
the work camp.
Yeah.
The work camp. Because Levinas, clever that he is, you know this story, that he was in a work camp, and when they led they separated actually the Jewish prisoners of war from the non-Jewish prisoners of war, but nonetheless they treated them as prisoners of war, and when they would go out to do their work, there was a dog that came and they barked. He was so happy to see them. And so Levinas says in this article about his experience that this is the last Kantian in Germany. Because it recognizes them for their human dignity. It doesn't recognize them as Jews, right, or prisoners. So it's a very beautiful little passing remark. And then a whole literature developed arguing about, well, what about the ethics of taking care of dogs, and what does Levinas think? So some people who are kind of disinclined toward Levinas, some people really dislike Levinas' philosophy. It is an ethical philosophy, and that provokes a reaction from some people who are in philosophy for different reasons. And so they latched onto this thing as if Levinas has no care for dogs. Of course he has care for all living creatures. But he provides this hierarchy. He enables us he helps us with these impossible choices between this and that. These are the choices we're facing. That's why freedom is such a burden. It's so difficult. This is why justice arises. Because if I help you, I may be neglecting someone else. And yet what more can I do than to help you? Of course I want to help you. But I don't want to neglect other people. So I'm torn. So we need a society of justice at the same time that we have a society of morality. This is Levinas. So I think this is how, and he's just saying that no doubt we have to care for things too. We care for things too. But that's not where we derive transcendence.
But my question is whether the things contain the potentiality to evoke the experience of infinity. That is my.
And the answer is no. They only do derivatively. That's his answer. They have a different kind of infinity, which he would consider kind of a mythical format. They have a mythical infinity. But in terms of the most powerful form of infinity, that is the phenomenologically determinative form of infinity, it's derived. They don't. That is, things don't have the infinity that people do or animals do. But I don't know. We don't. These are questions of discussion. I mean, students always ask themselves, or eventually they get to the question of, you can save a person or the last surviving works of Shakespeare, right? And of course you save the person. Goodbye, last surviving works of Shakespeare. But then there are people saying, no, the last surviving works of Shakespeare, right? It's only one person.
Saves my brother.
Oh, it's your brother-in-law.
There's another
So
case.
things are secondary. That's all. Things are secondary. How often do we know that? I mean, in New York City years ago, when it was a much tougher city than it is now, it was just understood if someone mugged you, you just took your wallet out and gave it to them. Because it's not worth getting stabbed or killed over your wallet. Just give them your wallet. I mean, what are you going to say? Oh, you can't have my wallet? And you're going to die over it? Who would die over that? So it was, we used to joke about how you could now have polite criminals. May I please have your, please have your wallet. And then we'd say, yes, here's my wallet. Because we would have done that. Really, if someone had come and said, no, please have, here it is, absolutely. Now, things have changed. New York's a little more safe. It's, they clamped down on crime. It used to be really a dangerous city. Anyway, we'll get back to this. We certainly will get back to this. Because there is an infinity in things. And Levinas is therefore wary of it and warns us against it. He's very much aware of it, especially from Heidegger. I mean, his interlocutor is Heidegger. How could he not be aware of that? This is his great dialogue. I'm trying to say it's not just, at some point you think he wants to make Heidegger great, because without Heidegger, who would he be? But it's, the fact was that Heidegger was great. Heidegger did walk through the door. Maybe as in the future people will not think so as much. I don't know. What can I say? Historically, he was great anyway. So there's no. Yes, that's all I want to say.
Let me go back.
Yeah.
Silly question. But say it's a really good dog and a real scumbag. Now, this is an undergraduate question, I know.
I wouldn't have any hesitation. I would say the scumbag. But I'm a real Levinas idiot. But no. So that question doesn't disturb me. The question is, what if it was Dostoevsky or Shakespeare? Then I mean, the writings of Dostoevsky, the writings of. But you mean that seriously? At some point, you think that we ought to choose?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. What bothered this
The
speaker?
content I would.
You know what bothered this speaker? The reason I learned this story from him, he said that what really shocked him is he gave a talk where he was going to ask that question, and he was speaking to a high school audience, and it was being filmed because he wanted to make a video of his presentation for on the web or something. And everyone in the room had been informed that this thing was being videoed. So when he asked the question, he thought, it being videoed, the answer would be different. That is facing off to the public, situation, the eye of the other, the face of the other. People would say, oh, of course I would say to do it. The answer was exactly the same. Exactly the same. That is identifiable, there are faces on the video. People said, I would save my dog.
I had one more difficult scenario when I taught you in my class. I asked my classmates to discuss whether you want to save your mother or your daughter.
Oh, God.
And it ended up, all my Westerners, the American or Canadian, I have some Western students, and they all saved the daughter. And all my Chinese students saved the mother.
Confusion.
So see this?
Yeah,
Cultural things there.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which page?
181.
So here, Levinas says, the transitivity of teaching is neither less nor more or something than freedom of master and student. So my question is similar to what I presented yesterday. So how can we understand the relation between this relation with master and student, and relation between the father and the son, as Levinas writes in terms of paternity and paternity. And here we look at this, of course, the master and student are free with respect to one another, but on the other hand, there is a kind of transitivity between them. And he says something similar regarding the relation to the father and son. So I don't know what kind of connection. Just analysis or one is how to understand this relation between the father and son and the master and student. Are they different, or there are some similarities in this relation?
Well, is your question about Levinas's idea about masters, teacher and student, or is it a question about why is the word transitivity is used here?
No, about this relation between master and student and the relation between father and son.
Well,
So what is it?
well, we haven't even touched upon father and son. I don't want to go there. It's much too complicated, and it requires that we go in depth into section 4. So it just isn't the place for that. But I agree with you, the word transitivity. She's mentioned everything in the preface, in section 1. Everything's in section 1. Do you want to respond to that? I want to look in the French because sometimes there are mistranslations. So this is phenomenon and being. Because I'm very clear about the relation of Cartesian teaching as opposed to minutics. So unless I'm mistaken, your question is about the use of the word transitivity. That's not your question. So tell me again.
And if you say section 4 of the finite infinity doesn't make much sense.
Well, it doesn't.
So my question is, so you mean that all the sections that you have otherwise and being make sense to you? I mean, is it also there's one section otherwise and being that
Well, you can decide for yourself. Decide for yourself.
I mean, for you.
No, you decide for yourself. You decide whether my explanations make sense to you. And if they don't, then you ask questions. But I want to look at the French there, because I find that very strange that word transitivity also, right at that moment.
So you wanted to know if it was the same kind of relation between father and son and master and the student?
In French, it's the same.
Oh, it's certainly a different relation. There's no comparison. It's completely different. Okay, if that's your question, I can assure you. Completely different. Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question.
I think teaching here is talking about the expression, the saying in the discourse with the relation to the other. But when you talk of fecundity, it's talking about father and son in terms of kind of ego things. Well, it means it comes from idea of broad fraternity. So it's not the kind of master and student relationship. It's completely different context.
It has to do with the creation of the identity.
But families criticize the idea of fecundity anyway.
I want to see that word transitivity, because that is disturbing.
It's the same word.
Is it transitivity?
Transitivity.
I'm doubting the French is right. Really? Okay, the distance and interiority remain intact in the resumption of the relationship. And when the soul opens in the marvel of teaching, the transitivity of teaching is either less than, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. That's a good question. I don't know what to make of it.
So the problem is the transitivity of teaching.
Well, just the use of the word transitivity here, when it doesn't seem faithful to Levinas's entire perspective. Because he goes on and on about the asymmetry of the relation.
Well, I think that what he's trying to do, it has very much to do with the gift, with the idea of gift. Yeah, we can understand the teaching as a gift. The master gifts the student, gives the student this idea of infinity. But as I told you before, but the student has to be ready to accept this. The student is not born as a student. So this acceptance from the student is not a passivity, is not something passive, but it's an act. And as act is a gift. The student gives the master the possibility to be a master, and the master gives the student the possibility of being a student. So this reciprocal relationship, although it's not symmetric, it's transitive because it's reciprocal.
Yes, I think Levinas says somewhere that the student has to welcome it,
Yeah,
which is
Then you
different
are
from
explaining
otherwise.
this kind of relationship between master and student in terms of economy, the gifts, the economy of gifts.
Well, in a way, it's beyond the economy, because in a normal, usual economy, the giving is not the receiving. So yeah, there's
To give something equal,
Yeah.
even if it's not exactly the same thing, but here it's not equal.
yeah,
There's
it's-
no equality.
there are two asymmetries. You
Yes,
said yourself
yes,
before. We
yeah.
have to do with two asymmetries. Both relations are asymmetrical, but they are transitive because we have to deal with giving and receiving in both cases. So
That's a good explanation, that it's asymmetrical, but it can be transitive.
yeah,
Yep.
it
Yeah.
remains asymmetrical, but it's transitive.
I can understand that. So the student can be the teacher,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
the student can be, and the teacher can be the student.
student, yeah.
That's the answer.
Yeah,
Is that satisfying? That's the answer.
I think so.
And another is normally teachers impart what has already been known, as already existing, the SUD. That is what normally transmitted from teachers to students. But a teacher role can be different as well. It can be revelatory and evoking new things. Then such experiences could be felt as experiences of alterity. That could be one point for evoking the idea of transcendence. In this, Kierkegaard explains such kind of a teacher-student relationship in one essay within Philosophical Fragments.
I think it's all meiotics there.
And then it would be not just exchange of few ideas, but more than that. When a teacher plays such a role, then it would be entirely different. The activity of teaching would be, revelatory, perhaps that term is not appropriate.
You want to be done? Or you have the final section?
Just maybe said in paragraph 6, Levinas distinguishes between pure speech and the speech of activity. So, and the pure speech is the expression, the way of manifestation of the other, and it can be linked to the same. And the speech of activity refers to the same. So we have here already the distinction between saying and said.
He's preparing us to
Yes, it's
move into
very
that.
nice,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes. And in the last two paragraphs, he is opening on the face and the other, and the first part, the third part.
He uses some very strong language. He says the surplus that language involves with respect to all the works and labors that manifest in man measures the distance between the living man and the dead, who, however, is alone recognized by history, which approaches him objectively in his work and his heritage.
Yeah.
History
Yeah,
teaches
anymore,
us as
yeah.
dead people.
Yeah.
Right? Where,
Can you, I didn't go further.
well, it's, insofar as you're living, you can attend to your own speech. You can revivify what you have to say, you can clarify, unsay it. We're all misunderstood so often that we try to explain ourselves and re-explain ourselves and clarify to ourselves and nuance what we have to say. Look at Levinas's writings, his constant effort to elaborate what he's saying. And he says this is the difference between a living person. A living person is someone who can attend to his speech, and a dead person can't. That's what a dead person is.
Attend his speech, so you say.
Attend.
Attend and attend his speech.
And tend, yeah, tend and attend. Absolutely. Tend and attend.
The opposite from hermeneutics. So Heidegger is also refer dilemma where dealing with the written text.
Yes.
So the text that can be interpreted,
That's right.
it's not there anymore to assist to attempt its manifestation.
This was a problem in philosophy. Socrates wrote nothing, and Aristotle wrote treatises, and Plato was the one who comes up with the real answer, the dialogue. And yet, nobody after Plato really masters the dialogue. People write dialogues. Berkeley wrote dialogues. Hume wrote dialogues, but no one treats them with the respect. Maybe Hume. Hume's are good. Yeah, Hume is good, but really Plato succeeds in this combination of the poesis, the creative work, and the livingness, the keeping it alive. Well, we don't know what Plato thinks. No one knows what Plato thinks. We know what Callicles thinks, Thrasymachus and Gorgias, and it's such a wonderful world here, these people speaking to each other. And we have to think for ourselves. It forces us to think for ourselves.
This is the Socratic heritage, and I think that we are not writing dialogue anymore because we conceive philosophy not as a dialogue, but as a contemplation. This is the problem.
A very good point. Levinas, as we've said many times, and Levinas says many times, abuses the formal logic. And it's only by that abuse, that revivification. Whereas there's a game of scholarship where you trap people in, oh, you said this. Well, here I am standing and saying, oh, I didn't mean that. Or oh, I'll take that word back. This is a better word. Or I'm sorry if you misunderstood. I meant by this, that. Right? Or as I say, I was willing to go so far in my understanding of Levinas as to deny the French. Say, oh, the French is wrong. But when I read Levinas, I can tell when there's mistakes in it. I mean, what does it mean to study philosophy? I can tell you what Sautereau would think about something he hadn't thought about. Right? You can tell me probably what Paul Ricoeur would think. Well, it's difficult, Paul Ricoeur. but you could say what Heidegger would say about something because you've gone into his head. Their stuff, Levinas is dead. This is it. This is all we've got. Thank God we got so much, so rich. But someday people will have trouble understanding this. Right? Someday it'll really be difficult. So I'm willing to accept transitivity on the basis of how we've explained it. So there I am, learning. Right? So there's more in the less.
This is a performative transitivity, so to speak, because you live yourself.
Well, I did it with your help. Haven't you read stuff where you realize, oh, they're missing the not, right?
Yeah.
Or they mistranslated, they left the not out. That happens all the time. You say, oh, I know he meant not. and then you go back and there's the not in the original, right? So, thank you so much. I want to thank you.